My beloved child, something happened last night, not the kind of moment the world would stop to notice. Not the kind of story that would appear in the headlines. It happened quietly, behind closed doors, while most people were asleep and the stars watched in silence. Yet somehow, before the sun even touched the morning sky, your heart felt different. You woke carrying an emotion you couldn't explain. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement. It was something deeper, something your soul recognized before your mind could understand. Stay with me until the end, because what happened last night has already begun changing the path ahead of you. There was a conversation you were never supposed to hear. A decision you were never meant to witness. A moment that unfolded in complete silence while you believed nothing was happening. But heaven has a way of moving quietly before anyone notices the miracle. The night carried words that could not be taken back, and those words are echoing into this morning in ways that neither you nor they fully understand. Sometimes life changes without thunder. Sometimes destiny whispers instead of shouting. You spend so much time waiting for dramatic signs that you almost miss the gentle moments that carry the greatest power. Last night was one of those moments. It didn't begin with certainty. It began with a restless heart that simply couldn't stay silent anymore. The house was still. Every room seemed wrapped in silence. The lights were dim, and the clock continued ticking as though nothing extraordinary was about to happen. But inside that quiet home, someone was gathering courage, one heartbeat at a time. They had rehearsed these words 100 different ways, yet when the moment finally arrived, every prepared sentence disappeared. Only one truth remained, and somehow, that truth led directly to you. They walked slowly toward the room where their father was sitting. Every step felt heavier than the last. Their hands wouldn't stop trembling. Their thoughts kept racing between hope and fear. Should they speak? Should they remain silent? Would everything fall apart? Or would everything finally begin? Those questions grew louder with every step until they stood face to face with the person whose opinion had shaped so much of their life. If this message is speaking to your heart, take a moment to subscribe to this channel, because every message here is meant to find the person who needs it at exactly the right time. And what you're about to hear may explain feelings you've carried much longer than you realize. For several long moments, nobody spoke. Silence has its own language. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Their father looked up from where he was sitting. His expression revealed nothing. Calm. Patient. Waiting. The room almost seemed frozen. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the windows as though even nature had paused to listen. Then, with a voice barely louder than a whisper, they finally spoke your name, not as an accident, not as a passing thought. Your name left their lips carefully, gently, almost like someone protecting something precious from breaking. It carried months of hidden emotion. Months of unanswered questions. Months of pretending everything was fine when inside, nothing truly was. And once your name entered that room, nothing could return to the way it had been before. Their father didn't interrupt. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he leaned back and watched quietly, allowing every word to find its place. Sometimes wisdom waits before answering. Sometimes love listens longer than expected. And while those few seconds felt endless, something unexpected was happening inside his own heart that nobody else could see. The conversation slowly unfolded. Your name came up again, then your kindness, then the way you made them feel understood when nobody else seemed to listen. They spoke about moments you probably forgot. Small conversations. Tiny acts of compassion. Ordinary memories that somehow became extraordinary inside their heart. Funny how the smallest moments often leave the deepest marks, isn't it? But what happened next changed the entire direction of the conversation. If these messages continue touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. You never know which message will arrive exactly when your soul needs to hear it the most. And today's message is only beginning to reveal its deeper meaning. Their father remained silent longer than expected. You might think silence means disagreement. Sometimes it does. But sometimes silence means someone is searching for truth before speaking. He lowered his eyes for just a moment, almost as though he was remembering something from his own past. A younger version of himself. A love that once asked him to choose between fear and faith. Memories have a mysterious way of returning exactly when they're needed most. Then something completely unexpected happened. Instead of questioning your worth, instead of pointing toward your flaws, instead of reminding them why things might never work, he asked only one quiet question: does your heart become more peaceful when you think about them? The room fell silent again, because suddenly, nothing else mattered. Not status, not opinions, not timing, not fear, only peace, only truth, only what love felt like beneath every layer of uncertainty. And the answer that followed surprised even the person who spoke it. Their eyes filled with tears, not because they were weak, but because pretending had become impossible. For the first time in a very long while, they admitted what had been hiding beneath every excuse they ever made. They confessed that no matter how hard they tried to move on, no matter how many distractions filled their days, every road somehow led back to you. Every future they imagined felt incomplete without wondering where you were. Every attempt to forget only made your memory stronger. If you're feeling something stirring inside as you listen, subscribe to this channel and stay close. Some journeys reveal themselves little by little, and you don't want to miss what comes next because the greatest revelation has not arrived yet. Their father listened carefully, then he smiled, not a dramatic smile, not a loud celebration, just the quiet smile of someone who finally understood what had been hidden all along. He stood up slowly and walked toward the window. Morning was still hours away. Darkness covered the sky, yet the first hint of dawn waited patiently beyond the horizon. Looking outside, he spoke words that would remain unforgettable. Real love doesn't disappear because life becomes difficult. Real love waits. It grows. It teaches. And if your heart keeps returning to the same person after every storm, perhaps that isn't something you're supposed to run from. Those words settled over the room like gentle rain. Yet even then, one final decision still had to be made. Hours passed. Neither of them noticed how late it had become. The conversation continued through stories, fears, regrets, and hopes they had never shared before. Walls built over years slowly crumbled. Pain that had been hidden finally found words. Healing often begins the moment someone chooses honesty over fear. And last night, honesty quietly won. When the first light of morning appeared, everything looked different, not because the house had changed, not because the world had changed, because hearts had changed, and changed hearts see everything differently. That was the moment their father made the decision that would shape everything moving forward. He turned, looked directly into their eyes, and said, "If this is where your heart truly belongs, stop fighting it. Stop hiding from it. Go where peace keeps calling you." Those words carried the weight of years, permission, acceptance, hope, a blessing that had never been spoken before. But even after hearing those words, something unexpected still stood between them and the future they longed for. If this message feels like it found you for a reason, subscribe to this channel and remain with us. Sometimes the next message arrives just before the next chapter of your life begins, and you may be closer than you realize, because while they finally received the answer they had prayed for, they still don't know how your heart feels today. They don't know whether you've healed. They don't know whether you've already walked away. They don't know if the door they once closed is still waiting to be opened. And that uncertainty has become the greatest fear they've ever carried. This morning, while the sun quietly rose above the horizon, they looked at their phone more than once. They typed, they erased, they started again. Your name appeared on the screen. Their thumb hovered over one final decision. The blessing had been given. The fear remained. Hope stood beside uncertainty. Love stood beside silence. Destiny waited between one heartbeat and the next, and just as they finally gathered enough courage to press the button that could change both of your lives forever, their phone suddenly lit up with something neither of you saw coming. This morning, their father made a life-changing decision about you. Find out now. Something happened last night, not the kind of moment the world would report. Not the kind of event that would make headlines or fill the streets with noise. It happened quietly, behind a door you have never opened, beneath a roof you have never seen, in a silence that carried more weight than 1,000 spoken words. And somehow, before the sun even rose, your heart already sensed that something was different. You may not have understood it. You may have tried to ignore it. But that feeling was real. Stay with me until the end, and if these messages speak to your heart, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Because what you're about to hear may explain the feeling you woke up with today, my dear friend. Last night unfolded in a way no one expected. The world outside kept moving as always. Cars passed. Lights faded. The stars watched without saying a word. Yet inside one ordinary home, something extraordinary was beginning. Someone you've been thinking about, someone whose name still echoes in places deep inside your soul, could no longer carry the weight in their heart. And without knowing it, they walked toward the one conversation they had avoided for longer than anyone realized. But what happened after that conversation began would leave even them speechless. You know how life sometimes feels like it's holding its breath. As if every unanswered prayer, every sleepless night, every tear you've hidden is waiting for one single moment to make sense. Last night carried that feeling. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet enough that most people would have completely missed it. Yet heaven often moves through whispers instead of storms. And one whisper was about to change everything you thought you knew. They stood outside their father's room for what felt like forever. Their hand reached toward the door, then pulled back. Fear has a strange way of convincing people that silence is safer than honesty. They almost turned around. They almost decided to wait another day. Another week. Maybe forever. But something inside refused to let them walk away again. It was as if their own heart had become stronger than every excuse they had ever believed. And finally, they knocked. The room felt unusually still. Their father looked up from what he was doing. He noticed something immediately. It wasn't just the nervous expression or the shaking hands. It was the eyes. Eyes carrying questions too heavy to hide any longer. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He simply waited. Sometimes the most important conversations begin with silence. And this silence carried the weight of years. Your name wasn't spoken immediately. At first there were pauses. Deep breaths. Half-finished sentences. Emotions that refused to come out in perfect order. But eventually, your name found its way into the room. Not shouted. Not explained with perfect confidence. It was spoken gently, almost carefully, like someone protecting something incredibly precious. And the moment your name was spoken, the atmosphere changed in a way neither of them expected. Have you ever noticed how one name can completely transform a conversation? Some names bring anger. Some bring regret. Some awaken memories people thought were gone forever. Yours did something entirely different. It brought honesty. Every wall they had built around their feelings began cracking apart. Every excuse suddenly sounded empty. Every reason for staying silent became impossible to defend. And their father saw it before a single explanation was finished. He leaned back quietly. His expression didn't reveal much. That silence lasted longer than anyone felt comfortable with. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Your heart would have raced if you had been there. Questions filled the room without anyone saying them aloud. Was this the beginning of acceptance, or the beginning of goodbye? Nobody knew. Until he finally spoke, and his first word surprised everyone. He didn't ask why they cared about you. He didn't question your past. He didn't criticize their feelings. Instead, he asked something far deeper: does this person bring peace to your heart? Even when life becomes difficult, the question seemed simple. But the answer carried the weight of an entire future. Because love isn't measured by perfect moments. It's revealed during uncertainty, sacrifice, and storms. And as they searched for an answer, memories began returning one by one. They remembered your kindness when nobody else noticed. They remembered conversations that stayed with them long after they ended. They remembered the comfort of simply knowing you existed somewhere in the same world. Most importantly, they remembered how different life felt whenever hope involved you. And as those memories returned, something inside them became impossible to deny. Their father listened without interruption. Every sentence uncovered another truth. Every pause revealed emotions that had been buried for months. Parents often notice what children try hardest to hide. He could see the fear behind the words. He could hear the love between every sentence left unfinished. And slowly, the expression on his face began changing. You may think decisions like these happen instantly. They rarely do. Hearts don't open with a single sentence. They open through understanding, through listening, through recognizing sincerity when it finally appears. Last night wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about truth finding enough courage to stand in the light. And truth has a quiet strength that arguments never possess. Then something unexpected happened. Their father stood up. Without saying a word, he walked toward the window. He looked outside into the darkness for what felt like forever. No one knew what he was thinking. No one dared interrupt. Even the silence seemed to wait for whatever would come next. And in that silent moment, everything seemed suspended between fear and hope. Finally, he turned around. His voice was calm, not emotional, not dramatic, just deeply certain. He said that life becomes very lonely when people spend more time protecting themselves than loving honestly. He admitted he had made that mistake in his own younger years. He confessed that fear had stolen opportunities he could never recover. And then he looked directly into their eyes before saying something neither of them expected to hear. If this person truly brings light into your life, don't lose them because of fear. Those words landed like rain after years of drought. Everything inside the room changed. The burden they had carried for so long suddenly became lighter. For the first time in months, hope felt stronger than doubt. And although nothing outside had changed yet, inside, everything already had. Maybe that's why this morning feels different. Maybe that's why your heart woke before your alarm. Maybe that's why you've been thinking about things you couldn't explain. Sometimes souls recognize change before circumstances do. Sometimes your spirit hears doors opening long before your eyes ever see them, and today, one of those invisible doors may have quietly opened. If this message is touching your heart, subscribe to this channel, because every story here is meant to remind you that hope is never wasted. There are moments when life seems completely still, yet unseen conversations are already shaping tomorrow. And perhaps, this is one of those moments. Still, the story didn't end there. After the conversation was over, their father reached into an old drawer. He removed something that had not been touched for years, a faded photograph. He looked at it for a long moment before smiling to himself. Then he shared a story from his own past, a story no one in the family had ever heard before, a story about the person he almost loved, but let go because he listened to fear instead of faith. His voice became quieter with every sentence. Regret filled the spaces between his words, and when he finished, he made one final decision that would quietly set everything else into motion. Before the sun rose this morning, he encouraged them not to wait any longer, not because the future was guaranteed, not because love is ever easy, but because unanswered hearts become lifelong questions. He told them some opportunities arrive only once. He told them some people are gifts disguised as ordinary encounters, and then, he gave them his blessing. If you've been following this journey, subscribe to this channel and become part of this growing family. Sometimes these stories arrive exactly when they're needed most. Sometimes they remind you that what feels delayed is actually being prepared. And sometimes, they become the sign you've quietly been asking for. As the first rays of sunlight entered the room this morning, everything looked ordinary again. Breakfast was made, the house became busy, people smiled as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but beneath the surface, a life-changing decision had already been made. One that involved your name, one that involved your future, one that could change both of your lives forever. Yet there is one detail no one has told you, not even they know it yet, because while their father gave his blessing, someone else overheard part of the conversation from just outside the room. Someone whose next move could either bring your two paths together. The hallway had gone silent again, but silence can be deceiving. Sometimes it hides relief. Sometimes it hides fear. And sometimes, it hides a choice that hasn't been made yet. The person standing outside that room never meant to overhear anything. They had simply walked by at the wrong. You have probably learned by now that every meaningful journey attracts resistance. Not because you are on the wrong path, but because every valuable thing is tested before it is received. Last night was filled with hope, yet this morning brought uncertainty. That is often how destiny works. It places light and shadow side by side, waiting to see which one you will follow. And as the sun climbed higher into the sky, another conversation quietly began. The person who overheard everything walked outside without saying a word. Their thoughts were racing. They remembered old misunderstandings. They remembered stories that had never been fully explained. They remembered moments when assumptions replaced truth. For years they believed they understood the situation. Now they weren't so sure anymore. Questions began replacing certainty, and those questions refused to leave them alone. One question echoed louder than all the others. What if they had been wrong about you from the very beginning? Meanwhile, inside the house, the father remained seated long after everyone else had left the room. He looked at the empty chair across from him and smiled sadly. Sometimes parents recognize love before their children have the courage to admit it. Sometimes they see two lives drifting apart because of fear instead of reality. He whispered something so quietly that no one else heard it. "I hope they don't wait too long." Those words carried the weight of experience. They came from years of learning that tomorrow is never promised. They came from memories of opportunities that disappeared because no one acted when their heart told them to. And as he spoke those words, something unexpected happened across town. Without any obvious reason, you suddenly paused in the middle of your day. Maybe you were making coffee, maybe you were driving, maybe you were simply staring out a window. Whatever you were doing, your thoughts drifted somewhere you hadn't planned. Their face appeared in your mind without warning. It wasn't forced. It wasn't something you were trying to remember. It simply arrived. As naturally as breathing. You tried to push the thought away, yet it returned stronger than before. Have you ever wondered why certain people enter your mind at the exact moment they're thinking about you? There are moments that cannot be measured with clocks. They happen beyond schedules and calendars. Hearts have their own timing. Souls have their own language. Last night, while one heart found the courage to speak, another heart unknowingly became ready to listen. You didn't know why today felt different. You only knew it did. And sometimes that quiet feeling is the beginning of something your eyes haven't caught up to yet. Across the city, they couldn't stop replaying the conversation with their father. Every sentence echoed in their mind, every word of encouragement felt almost unreal. For so long they expected rejection that acceptance felt impossible to believe. They wondered if they had waited too long. They wondered if your heart had already moved on. They wondered whether courage arriving late was still enough. Fear returned, but this time it sounded weaker than hope. Hope had finally found its voice. Yet another unexpected sign was waiting just ahead. As they stepped outside, a gentle breeze moved through the trees. One small leaf drifted down and landed at their feet. Most people would have ignored it. But they remembered something their grandmother once told them. When life wants your attention, it speaks through ordinary things. They looked up, the sky seemed brighter, the air felt lighter, even the silence no longer felt empty. They couldn't explain why, but something inside whispered that today was not an ordinary day. And for the first time in a long while, they decided to listen. You have spent so much time asking for answers that perhaps you never noticed how much you've changed while waiting. The version of you who once chased certainty has slowly become someone who values peace. The version of you who feared being alone has discovered strength in your own company. Those changes matter more than you realize. Because love arriving before those lessons would have looked completely different. Sometimes waiting is not punishment. Sometimes waiting is preparation. And your preparation may finally be nearing its purpose. If these messages continue to encourage your heart, subscribe to this channel and stay with us. Every story reminds you that hope often works behind closed doors long before it appears in front of your eyes. Some journeys take longer because they are shaping something deeper than a single moment. And perhaps your story is doing exactly that. As the afternoon approached, they picked up their phone more than once, Your name was there. One message could change everything. One call could break months of silence. Their thumb hovered over the screen. Then stopped, not because they didn't care, because caring had become almost overwhelming. Fear whispered that reaching out might reopen old wounds. Hope whispered that silence had already caused enough pain. They closed their eyes, took a deep breath, and just as they were about to press the button, the phone rang. But it wasn't you. It was someone they never expected to hear from. Someone connected to both of your stories. Someone carrying a truth that had been hidden for far too long, and before this day comes to an end, that truth will force everyone involved to question everything they believed about how your journey was supposed to unfold. The footsteps outside that room were so quiet that no one inside noticed them. The conversation had already ended. The blessing had already been given. The words that could reshape two futures had already been spoken. Yet someone else had heard just enough to understand that something important was happening. They didn't hear every sentence. They didn't know every detail. But they heard your name, and hearing your name was enough to awaken questions that had been sleeping for a very long time. As they quietly walked away, their thoughts raced in every direction. Why now? Why after all this time? Why had the atmosphere inside that room felt so different? Sometimes the smallest piece of truth can become the beginning of a much larger story. They carried those questions with them into the night, unaware that every unanswered question was quietly pushing destiny one step closer to you. Meanwhile, the person who spoke to their father couldn't sleep. Even after receiving the words they had secretly hoped to hear, peace didn't arrive immediately. Real change doesn't happen in a single heartbeat. Fear doesn't disappear because someone gives permission. Old wounds don't vanish simply because hope returns. Instead, two voices began speaking inside them. One whispered that this was finally the beginning. The other warned that they might already be too late. And those voices continued arguing until the first light of morning filled the room. Have you ever noticed how sunrise feels different after an important night? The same sky, the same sunlight, the same world. Yet everything somehow feels transformed. That was this morning. They stood by the window watching the sun climb higher, wondering if somewhere under that same sky, you had also woken with an unexplainable feeling in your heart. Because hearts connected by something deeper than coincidence often move together long before they meet again. Perhaps that's exactly what happened to you. Maybe you woke up earlier than usual. Maybe your thoughts drifted towards someone you had been trying to forget. Maybe a memory appeared without invitation. Maybe you felt hope even though nothing around you had changed. You may have called it imagination. But your soul has always recognized movement before your mind accepts it. And this morning, your soul had every reason to pay attention. As the day slowly began, their father remained unusually thoughtful. He replayed the conversation over and over. He remembered the honesty in their voice. He remembered the fear hiding beneath every sentence. Most of all, he remembered your name. Strange, wasn't it? Someone he barely knew had suddenly become impossible to stop thinking about. It wasn't because of what he had seen. It was because of what he had felt. Sincerity leaves an impression words alone never can. And deep inside, another decision was beginning to form. He walked toward a small wooden shelf in the corner of the room. Resting there was an old clock that had belonged to his own father. The clock had stopped years ago, yet he had never thrown it away. Every time he looked at it, he remembered one lesson his father used to repeat: the right moment always comes, but only for those willing to recognize it. Those words echoed through his heart again. He gently touched the old clock, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he smiled, because something inside him whispered that this story was far from over. Back in another part of town, you continued your morning without knowing any of this. You answered messages. You moved through familiar routines. You smiled when expected. Yet underneath it all was that quiet feeling, that gentle pull, that invisible expectation that today carried something unusual. You couldn't explain why ordinary moments felt so meaningful. Even silence seemed to carry a message waiting to be understood. Sometimes destiny does